This is your math gal, Julie Harland. Please visit my website at yourmathgal.com, where all of my videos are organized by topic. This is video 5 of equations with decimals. We're going to solve this problem on this video. So what makes this a little bit different than the previous video is that the coefficient of x contains a decimal. Now notice there's only one term on both sides. And so when there's one term, people might just go ahead and divide by the coefficient. That's the common method for solving an equation of that form. And then you have to remember how to divide with decimals. So the left-hand side, you get x. Well, of course, if you use a calculator, you could just put 42 divided by 0.3. But let's say you didn't have a calculator on hand. There's a couple ways you could do this. You can go over to the side for your scratch work and say 0.3 into 42, and then remember you have to make this a whole number, so you have to take this decimal, move it over, put a 0 there, and then go ahead and do your division. And that's going to give you 140 if you do that division. Alright, there's a way of doing this without doing long division. You have to make this a whole number in the denominator. Alright, so the trick for doing that is multiplying the denominator by 10 so you can move this decimal one to the right. So if you multiply the bottom by 10, the top by 10, this gives you a fraction with a whole number in the denominator because you have 0.3 times 10. That means you get to move the decimal one to the right, and you will just have a 3 in the denominator. And in the numerator, you could either multiply that, or how about if you just leave it as 42 times 10? I always leave things factored just in case something cancels. And in this case, you can cancel 3 into 42. It goes 14 times. So x is 14 times 10, or 140. So there's another way of getting 140 without doing the long division. But the basic approach here is just divide by 0.3, right? The rest of this is something I teach in how do you divide with decimals. All right, how you're going to deal with the 42 divided by 0.3. All right, but we're really concentrating on equations, so let's go back to the original equation. And I'm going to show you a method for doing this that will help you when you have more than just one term on each side of the equation. So what does 0.3 mean? Well, it means 3/10. So this means 3/10 x equals 42. Now we have an equation with a fraction in it. And hopefully you've watched my series of videos on solving equations with fractions. And in that, what we do is we can multiply both sides by the least common denominator to eliminate the fractions and get an equation without fractions. So let's see. There's only one denominator, 10, because it's 42 over 1. So I'm going to multiply both sides by 10. Now what happens when you multiply both sides by 10? You get 3x equals 420. You get an equation without fractions. So we also have just whole numbers, no decimals, right? So we started with decimals, right? 0.3x equals 42. And then by just rewriting that as a fraction and multiplying both sides by 10, I got an equation that has integers in it. All right, so now we can easily solve this. We just divide by 3, and we get x equals 140. Okay, that's method 2. Change the decimal to a fraction and multiply by the least common denominator. There is a little bit of a shortcut to doing that. I'm going to write it one more time. 0.3x equals 42. Instead of rewriting it as a fraction, you might notice I would like this to be a whole number here in front of the x. So what can I do to 0.3 to make it a whole number? Well, I can multiply it by 10. That would make it a whole number. So you could say, well, I'm just going to multiply both sides of the equation by 10, just like you did right there, except I'm going to write it here. I'm going to multiply each side by 10. And when you do that, you're now going to get a whole number in front of x. And then you proceed, and we keep getting x equals 140. So let's sort of review. All right, first method. Just ignore the fact that there's a decimal there as the coefficient, divide, and then deal with how to do 42 divided by 0.3. You could either multiply by 10 over 10 and get 140. You could do long division, 0.3 into 42, move the decimal at that time. But or you can get out a calculator and do 42 divided by 0.3. Second method. You have 0.3x equals 42. You're just going to write that as 3/10 so that you could get rid of the fraction by multiplying both sides by the least common denominator, eliminating fractions and decimals completely, and then solving the equation. And this last way is just a shortcut where you don't have to first write it as a fraction. Okay, so when you see 0.3, you want to move the decimal 1 to the right, you'll multiply by 10. If there were 2 places after the decimal point, you multiply by 100, so you could move the decimal 2 places to the right. But just keep in mind, you have to go, you want to see the rest of that problem, sorry. After you do it, then you get this problem without fractions again. Okay, so you're able to get x equals 140. So these are almost exactly the same. This is multiplying by 10 when you see it as written as a fraction. Here you're just seeing it as a decimal and deciding what to multiply both sides of the equation by. All right, let's check our answer. Okay, so we've got 0.3x equals 42. So we're going to put in 140 for x. So how do we do this? Well, you could do 3 times 140, and that's 420. And then move the decimal in one place because of that decimal point. And 42.0 could just be written as 42. And on the right we have 42. So that means this was the solution. So we can now write it in our solution set. This is your Math Gal, Julie Harland. Please visit my website at yourmathgal.com, where all of my videos are organized by topic.